A routine drive home turned into a nightmare when a power-hungry, prejudiced local cop pulled over the wrong man. He thought he was just harassing another civilian. He had no idea the quiet black man in handcuffs was a senior Secret Service agent, or that the United States government was about to descend on his precinct. The digital clock on the dashboard of the unmarked Dodge Charger read 2:14 a.m. Special Agent David Corcoran was running on fumes a stale cup of black coffee and the sheer adrenaline residue of a grueling 36-hour shift. He had just wrapped up a high-level protective detail for a visiting European diplomat in downtown Washington, D.C. Now all he wanted was to reach his quiet home in the affluent, heavily wooded suburb of Oak Creek, Virginia. David was out of his standard tailored suit, having changed into a faded grey hoodie and comfortable jeans at the field office. He was a man who preferred to blend in, 42 years old, athletically built, with a calm, observant demeanor, forged by 12 years of dealing with global threats. He didn't look like the head of a specialized counter-threat unit. He just looked like a tired commuter pushing through the dead of night. He turned onto Harrison Boulevard, a dark, winding stretch of road, flanked by towering pine trees. He was exactly 3 miles from his driveway when the darkness in his rearview mirror exploded into a blinding frenzy of flashing red and blue lights. David sighed, his broad shoulders dropping. He glanced at his speedometer. He was doing 40 in a 45 zone. He hadn't swerved. Both his headlights were perfectly functional. His government-issued plates were clean. There was absolutely no legitimate reason for the stop. Still training took over. He immediately activated his turn signal, pulled smoothly onto the gravel shoulder, put the car in park, and rolled down his window. He turned on the interior dome light and placed both hands firmly at the top of the steering wheel, right where they could be seen. In the side mirror, he watched the driver's door of the cruiser swing open. Officer Bradley Jenkins stepped out. Jenkins was a notoriously heavy-handed cop in the Oak Creek Police Department, a man whose personnel file was thick with use-of-force complaints that the local police union had managed to sweep under the rug. He approached the Charger with a slow, arrogant swagger, his right hand resting entirely too close to the grip of his service weapon. Jenkins didn't stop at the driver's window. He intentionally walked a few steps past it, forcing David to crane his neck backward, a classic intimidation tactic. Suddenly, the blinding beam of a heavy tactical flashlight pierced the interior of the car, hitting David squarely in the eyes. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now, Jenkins barked, his voice dripping with immediate, unwarranted hostility. David squinted against the harsh light, not moving his hands from the wheel. "Good evening, officer. My wallet is in my right back pocket. My credentials are in the center console. I need to reach for them. Is that all right with you?" Jenkins stepped closer, the beam of the flashlight dropping to illuminate David's face, then his hoodie, before snapping back up to his eyes. "I didn't ask for a conversation, boy. I told you to give me your ID." The word hung in the cold night air. Boy. It wasn't an accident. The sneer in Jenkins's voice was unmistakable. David's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his heart rate remained steady. He had faced down armed insurgents. A local bully with a badge wasn't going to make him lose his composure. "Officer, I am going to slowly reach into my back pocket to retrieve my license," David said, his voice, a low, even baritone, carefully devoid of any aggression. "Keep your hands on the damn wheel," Jenkins shouted abruptly, unholstering his taser and pointing it directly at David's window. "Step out of the vehicle. Step out right now." "Officer, there is a miss." I said step out of the car. "Do it now, or you're gonna ride the lightning." David evaluated the situation in a fraction of a second. The cop was severely agitated, completely abandoning standard protocol, and operating on blatant racial prejudice. trying to verbally assert his federal authority right now, while staring down the barrel of a weapon held by a nervous, angry man, was a tactical error. Surviving the street meant complying with the immediate threat and handling the fallout in a controlled environment. Slowly using just 2 fingers, David unbuckled his seatbelt. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped out into the freezing night air. He kept his hands raised, palms open. "Turn around. Face the car. Spread your legs," Jenkins commanded, rushing forward. Before David could even fully comply, Jenkins slammed him brutally against the side of the Charger. The cold metal bit into David's cheek. Jenkins kicked David's legs apart violently, nearly knocking him off balance. "You people always think you can drive through my town at 2 a.m, looking like you're scoping out houses," Jenkins hissed, patting David down with unnecessary force. He yanked David's wallet from his back pocket and tossed it onto the trunk of the car. "I am a federal agent," David said, calmly, his cheek still pressed against the icy metal. "If you open that wallet, you will see my federal identification. If you run those plates, you will see this is a government vehicle." Jenkins let out a cruel, hacking laugh. He grabbed David's wrists, twisting them painfully behind his back, and clamped the steel handcuffs on tight enough to bite into the skin. "Federal agent, yeah, and I'm the King of England. Shut your mouth before I add resisting arrest to whatever I decide to charge you with tonight." With a rough shove, Jenkins marched David toward the back of the squad car, pushing his head down and throwing him into the hard plastic back seat. The door slammed shut, sealing David in the dark, cramped space. Outside, he watched Jenkins saunter back to the Charger, pick up the wallet, and casually flip it open under the glare of his flashlight. David watched Jenkins' face. He expected to see the sudden, terrifying realization dawn on the cop's features. He expected Jenkins to see the gold star the Department of Homeland Security seals the holographic Secret Service credentials. Instead, Jenkins just shook his head, snapped the wallet shut, and walked back to the cruiser. He slid into the driver's seat, glancing at David in the rearview mirror with a look of absolute disgust. "Nice fake badge, pal," Jenkins sneered, putting the car in gear. "Let's see how funny you think it is when you're sitting in a holding cell for impersonating an officer." David leaned back against the hard plastic, closing his eyes. Fake badge. The sheer arrogance had entirely blinded the man. Jenkins had crossed the Rubicon, and he didn't even realize the bridge was already burning behind him. The Oak Creek police station was a small, brutally outdated brick building that smelled faintly of ammonia and stale donuts. At 2:45 a.m., it was practically deserted. A lone desk sergeant, a heavy-set man named Bill Russo, with a graying mustache and a bored expression, was tapping away at a keyboard when Jenkins dragged David through the heavy glass double doors. "Look what the cat dragged in," Russo muttered, not looking up from his screen. "What have we got, Brad?" "Suspicious behavior, failure to obey a lawful order, and get this bill possession of forged federal documents," Jenkins declared, proudly shoving David toward the booking counter. Russo finally looked up his eyes, lazily scanning David's casual attire and cuffed hands. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for probable cause. The systemic rot in the station was clear. Russo just accepted whatever reality Jenkins presented. Empty his pockets, put him in cell 2. Russo sighed, pulling out a plastic property bag. Jenkins slammed David's wallet onto the counter, followed by his keys and a secure government-issue cell phone he had pulled from David's jacket. Jenkins opened the wallet and dramatically pulled out the heavy leather credential case, flipping it open to display the gold star and the photo, ID. "Look at this garbage," Jenkins laughed, pointing at the badge. "United States Secret Service. Thinks he's James Bond or something. Guy probably bought it on the dark web to try and get out of speeding tickets." Russo squinted at the badge. For a fleeting second, a shadow of doubt crossed the older sergeant's face. The weight of the metal, the intricate micro-printing on the ID card, the holographic watermark, it looked incredibly real. "Brad, you sure about this? It looks pretty legit." "Legit? Look at him, Bill." Jenkins scoffed, gesturing at David with an open palm. "You really think they let guys who look like him protect the president? It's a fake. Run the name if you want. But I'm telling you, it's a prop." David stood silently, his wrists throbbing from the tight steel. He looked directly at Russo. "Sergeant, my name is Special Agent David Corcoran. My badge number is 884 Delta. That is a secure federal credential. If you input that information into the NCIC database, it will flag an immediate federal alert. I suggest you allow me my phone call before you dig this hole any deeper." Jenkins stepped into David's personal space, his face turning crimson. "You don't give orders in my house. You're a thug in a hoodie." "Give him his call, Brad," Russo said quietly. The sergeant was starting to sweat. Something in David's eyes, a terrifying, unflinching calm, was beginning to unnerve him. This wasn't how criminals acted when they were caught. This was how predators acted when they were studying their prey. Jenkins sneered but grabbed the landline phone from the counter, dialing the outside line and shoving the receiver toward David's ear, refusing to uncuff him. "Go ahead. Call your fake supervisor. Let's hear it." David didn't need to look at a keypad. He dictated a direct Washington, D.C. area code number. Jenkins dialed it, holding the phone up with a mocking grin. It rang twice. Then a crisp, awake voice answered. "Watch Center Agent Harris?" "Harris, it's Corcoran," David said smoothly. There was a microsecond of silence on the other end, followed by the immediate frantic sound of keyboards clacking. "Sir, you missed your check-in 15 minutes ago. We were about to ping your vehicle's GPS. Are you secure?" "Negative. I am currently detained at the Oak Creek Police Department in Virginia. The arresting officer has confiscated my credentials, labeled them fraudulent and ignored protocol. I am in handcuffs." The temperature on the other end of the line seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Harris spoke again, the relaxed tone was entirely gone, replaced by the lethal, mechanized efficiency of the United States Secret Service. "Understood, sir. Are you injured?" "No, just delayed." "Hold the line, sir. Patching you directly to Director Wainwright. He is in the operations center tonight." Jenkins, who was listening to the one-sided conversation, rolled his eyes. "Director Wainwright, give me a break. You guys are really committed to this LARP." Suddenly the voice on the phone changed. It was an older, gravelly voice, a voice that commanded rooms at the Pentagon and the Oval Office. It was Thomas Wainwright, Director of the Secret Service. "David, what the hell is going on in Virginia?" Wainwright demanded. David spoke clearly, ensuring Jenkins could hear every word. "Director, I was pulled over without cause by Officer Bradley Jenkins of Oak Creek PD. He refused to inspect my credentials, physically assaulted me against my vehicle, and has brought me in on fabricated charges. He is currently holding the phone to my ear because I am still in restraints." There was a heavy, terrifying silence on the line. Even Jenkins's smug smile began to falter slightly at the sheer gravity radiating from the earpiece. "Put the officer on the phone," Wainwright commanded. It wasn't a request. David looked at Jenkins. "He wants to speak to you." Jenkins snatched the phone, puffing out his chest. "Listen here. Whoever you are, impersonating a federal official is a felony, and you're going down right alongside your buddy, Officer Jenkins." The voice on the line interrupted, slicing through the cop's bluster like a scalpel. "My name is Thomas Wainwright. I am the Director of the United States Secret Service. The man you have in handcuffs is the Deputy Chief of the Presidential Protective Division. You have illegally detained a man who possesses a Class 1 national security clearance. You have 3 seconds to remove his handcuffs, or I will consider your police station a hostile environment, holding a federal agent hostage." Jenkins laughed nervously, looking at Russo. "Nice try, pal. You sound like an actor." Jenkins slammed the phone down onto the receiver, cutting the connection. He turned to David, a cruel smile returning to his face. "Nice trick. You almost had my partner here spooked. Cell 2, let's go." Jenkins grabbed David by the bicep and marched him down a short, dimly lit hallway, shoving him into a small concrete cell with a barred door. He slammed the heavy iron shut the lock, engaging with a loud metallic clank. "Get comfortable, 007, Jenkins taunted through the bars. "You'll see a judge on Monday." David stood in the center of the cell, slowly turning around to face the officer. He didn't look angry. He looked almost pitying. "Officer Jenkins," David said softly, "you just hung up on the director of the Secret Service. In approximately 12 minutes, you are going to understand exactly what a catastrophic mistake you have made. I highly recommend you spend that time calling the best lawyer you can afford." Jenkins flipped him the middle finger and walked away, the sound of his boots echoing down the hall. David just stood there in the quiet cell. He didn't sit on the bench. He just waited. He knew the protocol. He knew the watch center's response time. He knew that Thomas Wainwright didn't make empty threats. The quiet little town of Oak Creek was about to experience an earthquake. In the stale, quiet lobby of the Oak Creek Police Department, Officer Bradley Jenkins poured himself a cup of lukewarm coffee. He leaned against the booking counter, a smug grin plastered across his face. He was already running through the official report in his head, twisting the narrative to justify the bruises he'd left on his suspect. Behind the desk, Sergeant Bill Russo wasn't smiling. His eyes were glued to the heavy leather credential case sitting next to the suspect's phone. The gold star gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Against his better judgment and explicitly against Jenkins' earlier taunts, Russo reached out and picked up the ID. "What are you doing, Bill?" Jenkins scoffed, taking a sip of his coffee. "Don't tell me that fake piece of tin actually has you spooked. The guy is a nobody." "I'm just doing my job, Brad." Russo muttered, his fingers trembling slightly as he pulled his keyboard closer. "It takes 2 seconds to run it through NCIC, just to be sure." Russo logged into the National Crime Information Center database. He bypassed the standard local checks and navigated to the Federal Queries tab. He typed in the name Corcoran David. Then he inputted the badge number the man had recited from memory 884 Delta. He hit enter. The system didn't buffer. It didn't load a standard profile. Instead, the entire computer screen instantly inverted colors. A blaring solid red banner flashed across the monitor, locking out every other application on the terminal. A piercing, digitized alarm began to emit from the desktop speakers. Restricted file. Class 1 National Security Clearance. Immediate federal notification. Triggered. Do not detain. Russo's face drained of all color. The coffee cup in his hand shook so violently that dark liquid sloshed onto his uniform pants. He looked up at Jenkins, his eyes wide with a terror that bordered on hysteria. "Brad," Russo whispered, his voice cracking. "Brad, what did you do? What's wrong with the computer?" Jenkins asked, his arrogant smile finally faltering as the alarm continued to beep rhythmically. "He's not a fake." Russo stood up, panic seizing his chest. "Brad, you locked up the Deputy Chief of the Presidential Protective Division. The system just locked me out." It sent a distress signal to Washington. "Shut up, Bill, that's impossible." Before Jenkins could finish his sentence, a low, rhythmic thumping sound vibrated through the floorboards. It started as a distant hum, and rapidly escalated into a deafening roar. The thin glass panes of the precinct's front windows began to rattle violently in their frames. Jenkins ran to the double-glass doors and peered out into the night. Above the station, a black Eurocopter, AS-365, Dauphin, the signature aircraft of Federal tactical units, was hovering just 50 feet in the air, its blinding searchlight flooding the small parking lot with daylight intensity illumination. "What the hell?" Jenkins breathed, stumbling backward. Tires screeched on the asphalt outside. 5 matte black Chevrolet Suburbans, their grills flashing aggressive strobe lights, smashed through the wooden security gate of the precinct's parking lot and slammed into a defensive perimeter around the building. The doors of the SUVs burst open simultaneously. Over 24 men in heavy tactical gear, Kevlar vests and ballistic helmets poured out. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision. These weren't local SWAT officers. They were the United States Secret Service Counter-Assault Team CAT, the most elite, heavily armed protection unit on the planet, trained to repel coordinated terrorist attacks. And right now, their target was the Oak Creek Police Department. "Breach!" a voice roared from outside. The heavy glass double doors of the precinct were violently kicked open, shattering into 1,000,000 pieces across the linoleum floor. Red laser sights instantly cut through the dusty air of the lobby, converging directly on Jenkins's chest and forehead. "Federal agents, hands in the air!" "Do it now!" A tactical commander bellowed a custom M4, carbine pressed firmly into his shoulder. "Drop the weapon, officer! Drop it now, or I will drop you!" Jenkins was paralyzed. His brain couldn't process the sheer scale of the nightmare unfolding before him. He slowly raised his hands, the styrofoam coffee cup slipping from his fingers and bursting on the floor. Sergeant Russo had already thrown himself to the ground behind the booking desk, his hands interlaced behind his head, sobbing quietly. "Don't shoot, I didn't do it. He's in the back. He's in cell 2. From the sea of heavily armed operators, a man in a sharp, immaculately tailored dark suit stepped forward. He didn't wear body armor, but the authority radiating from him commanded the room. It was Special Agent in Charge, Jonathan Reed of the Washington Field Office. His face was carved from granite, his eyes burning with cold, calculated fury. Reed walked slowly up to Jenkins. The red lasers remained fixed on the local cop's chest. "Where is he?" Reed demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Jenkins' throat was completely dry. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic squeak escaped. He weakly pointed a trembling finger toward the holding cells down the hall. Reed didn't look back. He snapped his fingers. "Secure this building. Disarm these 2. If they twitch, put them through the floor." 2 CAT operators instantly collapsed on Jenkins, violently stripping his service weapon, his taser, and his radio from his belt. They kicked his legs apart, ironically mirroring exactly what he had done to David an hour prior, and slammed him against the booking counter. Reed snatched the cell keys from Russo's trembling hand and marched down the hallway, flanked by 4 operators with rifles at the ready. He reached cell 2 and slid the heavy iron key into the lock. The metal door swung open. Special Agent David Corcoran was standing exactly where Jenkins had left him. He looked completely unfazed by the commotion. "Are you injured, David?" Reed asked, his professional demeanor slipping just enough to show genuine concern for his colleague and friend. "Just a bruised ego and a slight scuff on my vehicle, John," David replied calmly, stepping out of the cell. I told him to make a phone call. He called the director. Reed sighed, handing David a master key to unlock his handcuffs. Wainwright practically ripped the phone cord out of the wall. He woke up the Attorney General 10 minutes ago. David rubbed his raw red wrists, the blood rushing back into his hands. He walked out of the holding area and back into the main lobby. The scene was chaotic, but perfectly controlled. Local police cruisers were beginning to arrive outside, responding to the commotion, but federal agents had formed an impenetrable wall at the perimeter, refusing entry to anyone. Jenkins was now the one in handcuffs, kneeling on the shattered glass of his own precinct. He looked up as David approached. The arrogance that had defined Jenkins's entire existence was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, empty stare of a man who realized his life was over. Agent Corcoran. Jenkins stammered, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat and dust. I made a mistake. It was dark. You fit a description of a suspect we've been looking for. It was just a misunderstanding, please. David crouched down so he was eye level with the disgraced officer. He didn't yell. He didn't gloat. The quiet authority in his voice was far more devastating than any physical blow could have been. You didn't mistake me for a suspect, Bradley, David said softly. You saw a black man driving a nice car in your town, and you decided you were the law. You ignored my credentials because your prejudice wouldn't allow you to accept that I outranked you. You assaulted a federal officer, you kidnapped me under the color of law, and you mocked the director of the Secret Service. David stood up, looking over at Special Agent Reed. Have the FBI's Civil Rights Division been notified? Assistant United States Attorney Peter Gallagher is on his way right now, Reed confirmed. They are executing a federal search warrant on this precinct as we speak. We are seizing all body cam footage, dash cam footage, and internal communications. Right on cue, the frantic wail of a siren approached, and a black sedan slammed into park outside. Mayor Richard Buckley and Police Chief William Donahue rushed toward the entrance, their faces pale with panic. Chief Donahue took one look at the federal tactical team, holding his precinct hostage, and immediately threw his hands up in surrender. Agents, I am the Chief of Police. We are fully cooperating, Donahue yelled, trying to distance himself from the disaster. He looked at Jenkins kneeling on the floor and pointed a condemning finger. Officer Jenkins has a history of insubordination. He acted entirely as a rogue element tonight. David exchanged a knowing look with Reed. It was a classic, desperate pivot. Save it, Chief, Reed said, stepping forward. The DOJ has already pulled Jenkins' internal affairs file. We know your department buried 6 different excessive force complaints against him to protect your municipal insurance rates. You aren't just losing Jenkins tonight. We are tearing this entire corrupt department down to the foundation. Donahue's jaw dropped. The federal hammer wasn't just falling on one racist cop. It was leveling the entire system that had enabled him. By sunrise, the story had leaked. Officer Bradley Jenkins was transported to a federal holding facility in Alexandria, facing charges that carried a mandatory minimum of 20 years in federal prison. Chief Donahue was forced to resign by noon, pending a massive Department of Justice probe into the Oak Creek Police Department. David Corcoran drove back to Washington that morning in his unmarked Charger. His wrists were still sore, and he was exhausted to his very bones. But as he pulled into his driveway, watching the morning sun break over the Virginia trees, he felt a profound sense of closure. Justice was often blind, and sometimes it was brutally slow. But every once in a while it arrived in a fleet of black SUVs, with zero tolerance for the bullies who thought they owned the night. What began as a terrifying abuse of power ended with a corrupt system being completely dismantled by the full force of the federal government. Justice isn't always immediate, but when it arrives, it hits hard. Did you love this intense, real-life drama? If you want more, gripping, suspenseful stories where the bad guys finally get what they deserve, drop a like, share this video with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more incredible content.